Hello, it's Amy. I'm back again with the Journal of Emily Shore. We have reached the 16th of September, 1835. Papa has been setting up in the kitchen garden a meridian line, a contrivance which Uncle Richard told him of for finding out with perfect accuracy the exact degree in which his watch gains or loses. It is a line of extremely fine wire suspended from a south wall. At the end is a piece of lead fastened, dipping into a cup of water to keep it steady. On the wall behind the line is a broad wooden peg about 1.25 inches in diameter. Papa took his watch to Bedford and had it set exactly by real or mean time. Then, having found by the almanac the difference that day between mean and apparent time, he knew at what time by his watch the sun ought to come to the meridian, and accordingly, observing the shadow of the line on the peg behind it, he marked the exact spot where it fell at the time pointed out by the almanac at apparent noon. Thus, for the future, observing the time when the sun's shadow again reaches the mark, and then calculating what o'clock it ought to be by his watch, Papa can always find out whether his watch went regularly. And I admit I don't quite understand how this is supposed to work. September 18, Friday. We finished the Netherlands this evening. I have certainly gained a great deal of information from it, being before quite ignorant on the subject of the Netherlands, and I am very glad to have read it, but it certainly is a very ill-written work. On the government of the country, the origin of the States General, their numbers, power, and constitution, the offices of stadholder and pensionary, points on which I wish very much to be informed, it says absolutely nothing. September 23rd. The tameness of Jack, the jackdaw, is quite wonderful. He is now in every respect at liberty, and yet he is more familiar than ever. He pays visits to every room in the house, tapping at the window if it is shut, and if it is open, he sits on the ledge or enters quite. The Chandlers, our tenants, finding him this morning among their filberts, brought him back to us, and our housemaid carried him in her hands into the library, which act did not alarm or offend him. But he sat quietly on a chair for about 4 hours, and while Papa was teaching the pupils, he began to prate as if he wished to attract their attention. When luncheon came in, he flew to the table, and when Papa carried him back, he returned till he was fed and sent out of the room. After this, he was coming into the house all day, especially into Mamma's dressing room, and at last, 7:30 in the evening, while we were sitting with fire and candles lighted and the shutters shut, a tapping was heard at the window. We opened it, and Jack entered. He sat for some time very solemnly on Papa's wrist. He drank and ate when we brought him biscuit and water, and at last Papa took him upstairs to Mamma's dressing room, for it was a very rainy night. He was placed on the back of a chair by the open window, and there he roosted all night. Early in the morning he began to prate, and then flew out. September 27, Tuesday. I walked with Papa to Tetworth to call on Mrs. Clutterbuck. Whenever Papa and I walk or drive together, our conversation generally turns on two topics. First, on literary subjects connected with my studies. Secondarily, on imaginary tours through England and Europe, which we plan together. September 30, Wednesday. Papa drove Richard and me to Biggleswade. On our way there, I was extremely delighted to see, for the first time in my life, a live kingfisher. It was in a damp, willowy meadow, flying across a little brook. It was quite like a flying sapphire with its splendid blue. It made no sound, and as we were in the phaeton, I could not examine or watch it minutely, but I observed that its flight was straight, low, and steady. October 1st, Thursday. I still continue always correct in my predictions about weather. Yesterday, as we were returning from Biggleswade, Papa remarked, "We are home just in time to escape the rain." It was then dull, damp, and cloudy, but having observed the actions of the swallows, I felt quite sure that it would not rain till next morning. I was quite right, and when I rose this morning, I looked again at the swallows, and was sure it would rain in a short time and very heavily. Accordingly, about an hour after, hard rain began and continued till 2 o'clock. October 2nd, Friday. As Richard and I were sitting in the library beginning our lesson with Papa at about 6:30, a curious interruption occurred. The footman announced that Mr. Clutterbuck wished to speak with Papa, who therefore went and brought him into the library. Mr. Clutterbuck then informed Papa of his errand. There is a notorious poacher about here named Page, for whose arrest a reward of £20 has been offered. The clerk of Everton was knocked down and injured the other day in the attempt. Mr. Clutterbuck and Mr. T. St. Quintin, the magistrate, sent for 2 Bow Street officers to take him up. He eluded them, but in the meantime 2 men committed a daring and imprudent theft of 2 ducks at a farm close to our house about 2 days ago. Today they were arrested at Gamingay by the Bow Street officers, handcuffed and ready to be committed. Mr. Clutterbuck asked if he and Mr. T. St. Quintin could examine them in this house on account of its being in the county of Cambridgeshire. He had brought the officers and prisoners along with him. Papa, of course, agreed. Just then entered Mr. T. St. Quintin and Mr. Foley, another gentleman who was visiting at Everton. The servants' hall was lighted up. Pen, ink, wafers, and paper were provided. They adjourned thither. The policemen, prisoners, the witnesses, they were all brought in. Papa, Mr. Foley, R.M., and the 5 pupils were present as spectators, and the examination began. It lasted about half an hour. The prisoners were fully committed and sent to Cambridge Gaol to await their trial at the next court sessions, which will be in less than a fortnight. Their names are Samuel Gilbert and John Baines. The Bow Street officers were named, one Goddard and the other Fletcher. The witnesses were 3, our footman, Green, the owner of the ducks, and Larkins, the man who saw them steal them. One of the prisoners, being asked if he had any questions to put, merely inquired of Larkins if, in drawing a lingo, "Where did you ever see me catch a duck?" Larkins, in a similar tone, "At the old pond." Gilbert, "Oh, did you?" Mr. St. Quintin examined the men, and Mr. Clutterbuck acted as his clerk. And we have a note here. It seems difficult now to believe that for this attempt to steal 2 ducklings in which the thieves were interrupted and ran away, these poor young men, scarcely more than lads, were sentenced to 7 years' transportation. The explanation probably was that they were believed to be poachers. I'm not sure what transportation could mean. My inclination here, 7 years transportation, could mean that they were sent off on a prisoner ship, perhaps somewhere like Australia, or transportation could mean they were sent off to work somewhere else. But yes, duck poachers. And I think it's very interesting that they would have what appears to be sort of this initial interrogation in their house because it was the most convenient place to do it. October 10th, Saturday. This was the first sunny day since October 5, and in consequence, I suppose 8 or 10 swallows made their appearance, hawking for flies very high in the air. This circumstance, a very common one, puzzles me more than any other concerning swallows. Not that I think it proves that they do not migrate. On the contrary, I think it tends to confirm the idea that they do, for if all remained behind, they would all come out on a fine day, instead of only a few stragglers. But whence come these few? They certainly have not left the kingdom. And where have they secreted themselves, or how subsisted during their disappearance? There is no bird which procures food so openly, or whose haunts are so public as the swallow, so that I cannot imagine how it can conceal itself for days, weeks, and even months. For swallows sometimes appear even in winter. As to its lying torpid, why does it ever wake up before a spring? Or are any birds formed for doing so? And there's a note. It has been ascertained that young swallows not yet fit for so long a flight are often left behind, so that they either depart when their wings are stronger or more likely perish ere long of hunger and cold. October 13, Tuesday. Herodotus is full of stories which would make an excellent foundation for dramas and narrative poems, into which I long to turn them. As for example, the misfortunes that befell Messerinus, the conclusion of the history of Ancis and Sabacos, the vengeance taken by Nitocris for the murder of her brother, and the restoration of Helen to Menelaus, which latter, by the way, though I did not know it when I first thought of it myself, is already the subject of the tragedy of Euripides. Jack has at last become really unbearable. It is impossible to frighten him or cure him of his mischievous propensities. He is forever invading our rooms, especially Mamma's, mine, Lord Desert's, and the library. During my absence from my room, he entered one day and stole from my desk my IHB pencil, which is a great loss to me. Another day, Mamma found that he had been in her room by the following signs. Her cap was on the floor, the covers were taken off 2 ink glasses, and a little plate was pushed off a box on which it was placed. Another time he picked and spoiled the edges of her prayer book. In Lord D's room, he tore to pieces the cover of a map. In Mr. Lushington's, he threw down a looking glass and overturned an ink glass. In short, there is no end to his imprudence. At the same time, he is so affectionate to Papa that it is quite interesting to see. If Papa opens the library window, Jack flies into the room from the other end of the garden. He will sit for an hour outside, pecking for admittance. He delights in being stroked and kissed by him. If Papa is in the garden, Jack flies up to him and follows him about, and he never bites or hurts him. But so troublesome is his familiarity that after many consultations, we had determined to get rid of him, to take him in a basket to a great distance there and let him loose. However, it was considered so probable that he would either return to us or, on account of his tameness, get killed, that we resolved to clip one wing slightly, so as that it may grow in the spring. This was accordingly done with great reluctance. Poor Jack, as soon as the operation was performed, finding himself unable to fly, went and hid himself in a dark nook, where he remained some hours as if ashamed of his short wing. He now looks very sad and pensive, and is so meek that he lets anybody stroke him without biting them. It must be a great misery to him to lose the use of his wings a second time, after having had it for 7 or 8 weeks, especially as he delighted in soaring high in the air. He has grown quite a handsome bird, and has a purple gloss to his wings. We feed him 3 times a day with bread, meat, and potatoes, besides biscuits and such things at odd times. He is beyond doubt the nicest and most amusing pet we have had, and it is great grief to us to treat him thus. But his mischievous disposition makes it quite unbearable. That really is unfortunate. It seems so cruel to take this bird out of the wild and then to clip its wings once again, or even to consider abandoning it after you've made it so tame. And it's to be expected. Birds are never going to be 100% tame. They're always going to have, as she says, a mischievous bent about them, because birds are curious. They like to explore, and I'm not sure what they expected, allowing this bird to fly freely and wander through their home. But we'll leave it there for now. Next time we read, we'll be back with October 20th of 1835.